Hello, and welcome to our final segment, Week 6, Video B. And we are going to be talking a little bit more about organization, or people in organization. So sit back and enjoy. The first thing we want to take a peek at is an organizational chart. And there are a number of different ways we can choose to organize our firms. One that we're going to see right here is basically a functional organization, where we see at the top our top level executives, and maybe for a small firm or like a small franchise that we own, maybe that's us. Maybe it's me. That's me at the top of the chart. And then the elements underneath might be things like the buying function, the selling function, or the controlling function. When we look at functions, it could also be things like our accounting function, and under selling it might be the counter help. Again, depending on the size of the firm, the organizational chart can be pretty detailed. We could have 3 different jobs: the person who stands at the counter, the person who takes care of our back office and accounting, that sort of thing. So it's important to kind of recognize or apply this to the level or size of the firm that we're dealing with. In regards to organizational design, some of the things that we want to consider is whether or not we want a centralized organization or decentralized. With centralization, there's little or no authority, and job activities are delegated to subordinates. A relatively small number of line managers make the decisions and hold most of the authority and power. In a decentralized position, the authority tends to fall lower, on a lower level, and to be with the people doing the job. Again, if you've got good employees, allowing them to make certain decisions can really impact and benefit your firm. Let's say, for example, somebody is dissatisfied with the product or service. If your front-end person has to say, well, wait a second, I need to check with management, and they're not here today, you're not going to satisfy that customer. They were already upset to begin with. That's why they came back or came to complain. You would like to be able to allow a certain amount of delegation to the person handling that so that they can resolve it immediately. And so there's a lot to be said for decentralization when you have the people who can make those kind of decisions. Okay? Let's see. When we look at organizational design, we want to consider what kind of command, if you will. The unity of command suggests that no subordinate should have more than one boss. As a general rule, that's the best rule. We'll see exceptions to that when we take a peek at the matrix design. But for a moment, let's just consider what that's saying. If, let's say, I am the owner, but I don't work operationally that much, and so I have a manager who runs the day-to-day operations, and that person manages my individual employees. Unity of command suggests that I, as the owner, wouldn't jump over the manager in order to try to lead the individual employees. I would put my recommendations through the manager. That way each of the individual employees has one and only one boss, which is their manager. That keeps things like opposing directives from becoming a problem. So let's say the manager had told them to do it one way and I'm telling them to do it another way. That doesn't make sense. It leaves them with a dilemma. And so if I want to change the way that person is being managed, I should talk to the manager, and then that manager can change the directive. Okay? Division of labor suggests that a job can be performed more efficiently if the work is divided amongst individuals and groups so that attention and effort are focused on discrete portions of the task. Henry Ford was actually the marvel of this when he designed the assembly line. Well, we can use the same ideas when we design our program, and what that basically allows is a team that works well together to be the most efficient. So the person who takes the orders the best is taking orders, those that construct the product are constructing, and those who are doing the bookkeeping do bookkeeping. They don't try to do each other's jobs. And when everybody does it well, the division of labor made sense, and you are the most efficient. Span of control or span of management addresses the number of people or subordinates that a manager supervises. With smaller firms, like a franchise, that might not be a big issue. Maybe you have one manager for each location that you have, and they manage everyone. As you start getting multiple franchise locations, all of a sudden you might have additional layers of management. You say, okay, well, I can have one manager who can handle up to 3 to 5 locations. If I have 10 locations, or if I get that 6th, I'm going to need to adjust the way that it's organized because the span of control is too broad. They can't effectively manage 6 or 7 locations and do the kind of job that I'd like them to do. So understanding what the span of control is and what's the most efficient for your firm makes a difference. Okay? So we want to be concerned about how we're going to design that organizational structure to have addressed each of these functions most effectively. When we look at this slide, we see a divisional design that might be based on divisions as compared to functions. Initially we were looking at functions, maybe the accounting function or the sales function. When we look at divisions, we might be saying, okay, I have 3 franchise locations, and the organizational chart is going to show that each franchise location controls everything underneath them, rather than saying all accounting functions are controlled by the accountant. It's a different way to organize based on control. When we look at the matrix design, we're basically trying to say we want the accountant to have a role, or the sales division or marketing division to have a voice, as well as each individual franchise location. On the surface, this sounds better, because you say, wait a second, we can focus on a multiple number of elements and do a better job with all of them. The problem with this is that we lose that unity of command thing. So let's say a particular employee has the location manager telling them to do one thing, and the sales or marketing manager telling them to do another. And this happens a lot with a matrix design, because you literally have organized it to make 2 things equally as important. And that rarely works out well, and we have seen that in real practice. It's usually not a good form of design. Another way to design is based on virtual design. And again, I'm going to suggest that many of you probably aren't going to have an issue where you've got a lot of employees working from home or from the virtual office, but recognize that you need to understand how you're going to organize when you do have a virtual design situation. This next slide we look at, and I know you recognize the legal forms of organizations from previous discussions. One of the things, and we talked about, like when we were talking about accounting and cash flow, is we often choose which way we're going to organize based on things that are important to the owner. And again, these discussions tend to take place best with an attorney or an accountant, but you want to recognize things like what is the owner's vision, the desired level of control, what kind of structure you're going to be looking at, and really what the franchise is requiring. Oftentimes the franchise is going to tell you exactly how you're going to do it. So just be aware, again, that it's one of the considerations when you're looking at management of people as well. Something that becomes very significant is hiring new people. And certainly in this chapter where we're looking at human resources and people, we don't want to ignore the hiring issue. It's hard to find good people that are going to work, that have the abilities or the skill set that you need, and are going to be committed to your organization. So learning how to do it is very important. You want to be able to attract the right kind of person. You want to be able to develop them or train. So what kind of training program do you have in place? Because you might have people with great skill sets, but you need to add the training to make it applicable to what you're trying to accomplish with your firm. And then you want to be able to retain them. Because once you've developed their skills, you certainly don't want them to go to the competitor. So how do we do each of these things? When we're looking at hiring new people, we want to make sure that we're identifying what the job requirements are. We want to choose sources for candidates. Are we advertising on Craigslist, or are we going to the local high school to advertise? Are we using an HR firm? We want to review applications and resumes, looking at the skill set and understanding what their skill set is telling us about them, right? We want to interview the candidate, talk to them, find out more about them, conduct employee tests and references, because remember, just because somebody wrote it on a resume doesn't make it true. And it's absolutely vital that we do those call-ups. We call previous employees. We call people who know them. And sometimes that's not the fun part of hiring, but it is certainly a vital part of hiring. And then we want to select a candidate and negotiate an offer. So we choose the best candidate based on things like skill sets, how much we can train them, and whether we can afford them. There might be people who come to us with absolutely a wonderful background, but we simply can't afford to use them. And so we need to hire somebody else. So that's part of the negotiation and understanding process. Once we've brought them in, we want to make sure we have clearly established what our performance expectations are. And we touched on that in Section A. How well do we expect them to do their job? What are the criteria that they can help to manage themselves? So let's say you've got somebody who really wants to meet your expectations, but they just don't know what your expectations are. It's up to you, the manager, to have delivered those. We want to make sure that we're accommodating for disabilities because it is a law. We do not want to leave ourselves, and of course it's the right thing to do, but certainly we do not want to ignore the accommodations. And then we want to worry about retention because hiring and training is expensive, and therefore retention or the lack of retention is a real problem. Not only that, if they go to our competitors, they might bring some of our customers with them. So particularly as a small firm, we want to be very concerned with doing things like incentives for staying. Maybe we give frequent bonuses or raises or performance evaluations that recognize what people are contributing. And those are all important in terms of keeping our employees and keeping our customers. Something that we want to recognize is things like termination and outsourcing. When does it make sense to terminate an employee? And again, we touched on that in 6A. If they're not a good fit, it's better that we let them go or encourage them to go or ask them to go. Termination at will could be we might have hired somebody across the Christmas break and we needed more help, and when the break is over or when the busy period is over, we let them go. Termination for cause would be they did something that we can't continue to live with. Maybe it was a theft issue, maybe they're just not competent for the position we hired them for, or maybe they're indifferent. They have the competencies, but they don't choose to pursue their strengths. At any rate, we need to get rid of people when they're not a good fit for us. And sometimes we might choose to outsource. Let's say there was a job that, maybe it's a delivery position that we're hiring. We just can't seem to keep somebody in the position. Maybe we hire an outside firm that does that very well, and they might even do it cheaper than we were able to do it. Certainly, when we look at deciding about who we keep and how and whether or not we outsource, we want to recognize how important office productivity is. We know that the smaller a business is, the more efficient and effective it must be, because we just don't have a lot of room for gaps. We can't pay people when they're not working. We can't afford those inefficiencies. Again, sometimes that leads us to things like virtual or telecommunications. If nothing else, maybe we have one manager who's available for 16 hours. They're at the location for 8, but they're available by smartphone or whatever for the other 8. And of course, then we need to pay them for that sort of thing. Bottom line is productivity is a very significant issue. Ultimately, it comes back to the same thing we keep talking about. These things tend to enhance customer value. I mean, if somebody comes and gets to know the clerk at your counter, that's an advantage. They come in and they enjoy chatting with them. That brings people in. That's a value. That's where we can actually differentiate because of the relationship. Those sorts of things build on cash flow and allow us to maximize what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed everything that we've brought to your attention, and you have a great franchise.